My name is Sue Martin. This is my seeing eye dog, Quan. He's a 3-year-old German Shepherd, and he's wearing his working clothes, his harness and leash and collar. Hello, big boy. On March 1st, 2017, my husband, Quan, and I boarded a plane. It was flight 327, bound from Reagan National to Dallas-Fort Worth. The seats were assigned there at the gate, and they gave us seats in the bulkhead row. Some planes do have more room in the bulkhead row, and some don't. Unfortunately, Flight 327 did not have enough room for Quan. Because the American did not allow me to pre-board, I had the whole passenger complement breathing down my neck, and really nowhere to put Quan to get him out of the way. I tried. I took off his harness, spun him around, and tried to back him in to the inadequate space. I fell in the process and struck my hip on the armrest of the row. I realized it was not going to work for a 75-pound dog and 3 adults to sit in this bulkhead row. So I requested to be reseated, and the crew refused my request. So I asked what it would take to be reseated, and the crew told me I would have to go back into the terminal and talk to the gate agent. So I put Quan's harness back on and directed him against the stream of traffic back up the jetway and crossed to the place where I had shown my boarding pass to the gate agent. I said, "There's not enough room in the bulkhead row. May I please be reseated?" And the gate agent said no. And I said, "Okay, is there any availability in first class?" And the gate agent said that dogs are not allowed to fly in first class. So at this point, American had already violated 2 provisions of the Air Carrier Access Act. And I really wasn't sure what to do. I know now that I should have asked for a CRO, Complaints Resolutions Official. Feeling sort of hopeless and somewhat helpless, I turned around, directed Quan back down the jetway, and as I walked through first class, a man stood and said, "Here, you can have my seat." And I said, "Are you sure?" And he said, "Yeah, I do this all the time." So I directed Quan back to the bulkhead row where my husband was still sitting and told him of the kind offer. He told me to have fun. And we swapped seats. So I sat down in the first class row, took off Quan's harness, and buckled my seatbelt. I had been sitting there quietly for about 10 minutes when a man appeared and did not identify himself by name or role. And he said, "Ms. Martin, you need to get off the plane." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "I don't want to have a private conversation in a public place." And he walked away before I could say, "Who are you?" So I got up, harnessed my dog again, and directed him to the door of the plane. But before getting off the plane, I said, "Who are you?" And the man identified himself as a supervisor. So I said, "Quan, forward," and stood before the supervisor. And he said, "The crew has decided that your presence on this plane is an aviation security risk." And I just looked at him like, "Okay." And I said, "Well, why am I a risk to the safety of this flight?" And he said, "The crew has decided you're a risk to the safety of this flight." And I just looked at him. And finally he said, "Look, American Airlines knows all about emotional support animals." At which point I interrupted him and I said, "Why are we talking about emotional support animals? I am blind. This is a guide dog." He went silent, and I thought that settled the matter. I picked up the harness, directed Quan back into the plane, and took my seat again. About 5 minutes later, another man approached and said, "You have to leave the plane." And I didn't get up. I said, "No, I'm not leaving this plane." And he stood there for several minutes just repeating, "You have to leave this plane. This plane cannot leave the gate until you're off." And basically, he bullied me into leaving the flight. As I stood from buckling Quan's harness again, I straightened up and I literally had tears in my eyes. It felt to me like American is throwing a blind woman with a guide dog off a plane where I am going to be completely alone in a strange airport, a strange city, without my dog's food and equipment, and I'm going to be stranded. And then I thought, nope, I am not going to give in to this arrogance and these lies. So I directed Quan back to the bulkhead row and said, "Jim, I have to leave the flight." And of course, Jim came with me. I left the flight without another word because at this point I was pretty traumatized. Jim, however, stopped at the cockpit and asked the pilot why we had to leave. And the pilot's reply was, "Because I said so."